Welcome back, everybody. You got Will and Iman here from the block runner Metazone, Rovi, and Mscribe, and today we're going to talk about the freeze.
The freeze.
And it's not cold outside. It's getting cold in crypto, it seems.
How cold? Because there's different
freeze
variations of coldness in crypto, but you're talking about a completely different type of chill.
Code freeze.
There you go. Not like the price of cryptos or
No. Bitcoin's
cold.
down 7%, which is like the sky is falling, apparently, to some people.
It's like the flash crash of all time. Pretty much. But it's not.
No.
This is normal price action, but we're not even talking about that.
No, we're not.
What are we talking about, dude?
All right, so let's take a look at this tweet here. So best in slots, we have introducing OPI, which is an open protocol indexer, the first open source indexing client for BRC20 and other meta protocols on Bitcoin. And so it goes into details, like for the eager devs, there's a GitHub link, which I do recommend you guys read. I know GitHub reading isn't like a common practice for most people.
Correct.
But
correct.
it is definitely worth like diving into and kind of reading.
Okay.
But OPI currently supports BRC20s and bitmap. Look at that.
Look at that, dude. Of course, you gotta always bring in the bitmaps.
You got to.
There's too much value there.
Support for SNS is also coming soon. For a little backstory and perhaps some alpha, keep reading. And why did we build OPI? We're protocol indexers at heart. We who love meta protocols on Bitcoin and are dedicated to their success, starting with BRC20s. And so they go forth and they kind of list out their partnership. We got Layer 1, Domo Data, Unisat, Hero.
I've seen these
Alex.
names together before.
Yeah, this is the crew.
This is the crew.
The friends.
These are the guys that I think there's one missing though. It's Stacks. Stacks is definitely in here.
Well, that's
because
like
I remember when these names were all like bunched together, they were all like working on some like second layer Oracle solution that was on Stacks. Remember?
Yeah. And so this is like a result of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're getting closer, in other words. Actually, they're done, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So why is this a big deal and why we're talking about it? Well, Benny chimes in. He was like, so forking ordinals and bribing with tokens is a new meta, ? So I looked into this. I was like, wait a minute. What is he talking about here?
Yeah.
So of course he's referencing basically this release, right? This fork. So how do we know it's a fork? Well, if you go click on that GitHub, and I'm bringing it up here, it talks about OPI, right? The open protocol indexer, and it says OPI uses a fork of 0.9 with minimal changes to maintain compatibility with base layer rules. So it is built with modularity in mind. So this modularity in mind thing is basically a way to extend functionality with, beyond 0.9.
Right.
But it extends functionality in their own image, right?
Well, it's remember this, this is Unisat's doing.
Correct.
The whole modular architecture has always been like Unisat's way to, I guess, lead them towards some sort of DeFi solution.
Yeah,
right?
which is additional functionality.
Correct. Yeah, if it's not going to come from the base protocol itself,
correct.
We've got to add these extendable features similar to Tap. Tap is the same thing.
Tap is the same thing. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So why is this fork a big deal? Well, if you go look at Benny's comment here, it says, please join the discussion about freeze forks, BRC20 token incentives versus ORD updates. So I wanted to, let's actually click on this. That way we can see the discussion happening on GitHub. But here, it was a pull request, and then now it's like a full,
issue
here. Yeah. So take, for example, the fork that commits freezes to 0.9 and supporting BRC20 and bitmap. There are also plans to support more inscriptions and meta protocols, and so it refers back to the OPI GitHub. Since 0.9 is already used by a majority of marketplaces and exchanges from which some might not understand that they actually use this version instead of the latest release, this disincentivizes the ordinal space to go with further ORD wallet upgrades. So what he's saying is, if everyone is I guess running their indexer off of this 0.9 update, right? And they begin to use the OPI like built kind of fork.
Yeah.
That means that when Ordinal Wallets updates, right, the Ordinal client updates to 1.0, which is about to happen in a couple of weeks, when people use that 1.0 update, it is invisible to OPI.
Mm.
And so what will happen is like, well, what if like these huge players start trying to figure out what's happening with Bitcoin? They start indexing. Well, they're going to go to OPI and they're going to use this as an indexer. And all of a sudden, like big players potentially, let's say Coinbase, Binance, they start using this indexer. But we're using the actual Ordinal wallet client updates. And we start doing our own thing with our own fungible tokens and NATs and all this stuff.
Yeah.
All that all that like movement and transactions is completely invisible to this indexer.
Right.
And so this is a problem because now users are going to be like, hey, I minted this thing over there on this website, but then I go over here and it's like there's nothing there. And so now you have like this battle of like user experiences that is completely dwindled as a result of this.
Well, couldn't it just be like it's just like the platforms or whatever. It's just an ecosystem divide, right? Is ultimately what this is.
But it's a divide, but that is non-obvious to people who are participating.
That's true.
It's not like you're saying I hold a BRC20 and then this one is I hold stamps. There's a clear divide. You're picking one path or another because there's only so much money that you have, right?
Yeah.
So you pick one.
Yeah.
On this one, you think you're picking one thing and you're thinking you're sticking with Ordinal wallets and like this whole Ordinal thing, but you really aren't.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be definitely some more transparency to the end user, like so people understand, this is in line with, whatever the future upgrades may be coming from the Ord wallet itself or not. Right. So there needs to be something that distinguishes, I guess, these two potential camps.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because so Benny comes in here. There's no problem with forking. Of course you can fork.
Like,
these are all
so
open
far,
source.
This sounds okay. It's like this can happen.
Yeah, it's fine.
I get to choose as a developer or a user. It's like, which of these two do I want to stick in like dinosaur land?
Sure.
Which you can call it that only because, it's old. It's in a future scenario, prehistoric.
Yeah.
Considering one of these like continues to evolve down the line, the other like I guess it can evolve itself as well with these modularities and such.
Yeah.
But it's obviously not in line with, I guess, the inception base layer.
Yeah, and if you're an elite developer, you look at the Ordinal client, the Ordinal wallet, and you can say, hey, you know what? I can do a better job than this. Casey doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
So I can fork and make a better job than what Casey's doing. Yeah. That's completely fine as well.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's what they're doing here.
Yeah.
But Benny says that there's no problem with forking per se. Ultimately, this will lead to fragmentation of the Ordinal ecosystem. Essentially what a fork does, right?
Yeah.
Confusion and incompatibilities, especially since these forks do not use a custom Ord envelope tag.
Yeah.
So
there's a distinguisher right there.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this fork is using the same tag, and then indexers like Benny, for example, they're indexing this envelope, and all of a sudden there's inscriptions that are not following the standards, the Ordinal client standard.
Yeah.
And now there's like a huge mess.
Correct.
And that's the issue.
Yeah.
So so what does Benny propose here? So Benny proposes eras, inscription eras. And so now with this inscription era, it's a formal recognition of the Ordinal client and like the eras that have existed with all these updates.
Yeah, this sounds very much necessary because I think it's fine if the ecosystem divides. I guess it's fine it's not fine in the sense like now we have less cohesion.
Yeah,
which I was hoping like over time we'd come to a
consolidate.
Point where, yeah, exactly. Like all these fragmented, I guess, ecosystems or whatever, technology stacks, whatever, they would all converge into something cohesive that we could all kind of embrace and
kind of like
build on top of.
Kind of like ERC20 and NFT standards. Like they're all basically the same thing.
Yeah, like on Ethereum, you saw everything kind of like start off in a much more fragmented state, kind of like where we are in Ordinals. But yeah, everything did eventually kind of like the consensus formed.
Yeah.
So we're going to build value in these digital asset space. We're going to use these very, confined methods.
Yeah, you wouldn't go to Ethereum and create your own fungible token standard.
I mean, you can.
You can, but you wouldn't, right? Because it wouldn't make sense.
Maybe like in the early days you would, because it's like the space is open, right? The race is still on. But yeah, like now, I mean, you got inscriptions and such, but now I feel like the space is reopening to now like new attempts to create some sort of new digital value layer.
Well, because there's different value propositions for doing inscriptions versus a ERC20.
Correct. Right? Yeah.
So So now the market is now kind of opening up to like these different ideologies and different standards, and
Yeah.
so that makes sense. And so with this era like concept, I think it makes sense for Ordinals client to support this. So Casey does chime in here and says, you know, there's some complexities with doing this, and you know, a lot more testing is necessary, but it is important to kind of distinguish these tags. If you're going to fork it, but call it something else.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because typically, like when we saw forks in the past, there were entire chains, right?
Yeah.
And these whole chains had whole separate tokens to support their networks and such. So
right.
Those distinguishers were readily obvious. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, these are two completely different tickers.
Yeah.
Right? And so, the back end functionalities or whatever was different, you know, as far as like the technical frameworks between the two chains.
Yeah.
Maybe a little less obvious to the front end users, but like the name and the token itself, like the value of the ecosystem was different. The market caps are different, right?
So
you don't have that in meta protocols.
Well, not only that, I mean, this is why it is the perception of this is sort of a little bit hostile because they forked it, like just like we can fork Bitcoin. But imagine if we forked Bitcoin and we called it Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That wouldn't make sense, right?
It would be pretty tough.
It would be tough to do that first, but I could sell you Bitcoin right now. Like for real, I could fork it. I can sell you Bitcoin and convince people who don't understand cryptocurrency that this is real Bitcoin. Right. That's the issue, right? Because they forked it and they didn't call it something else. They didn't call it, Ordinals. Right. Because if Coinbase looks at this or a developer looks at this and they say, okay, I want to support Ordinals, I'm not going to support Portinals. I'm going to support Ordinals.
It would be up to the developers again to solve this problem. Instead, if this wasn't figured out at the infrastructure protocol layer, the developer, the platform builders would have to figure this. Just put an asterisk next to that.
Yeah.
It's like this is the Bitcoin. Here's the Bitcoin with an asterisk. Just so you know, this is the Bitcoin that was forked.
Yes.
Right. There's a little eye next to it.
Yeah.
Little info icon. Just so you know.
Yeah.
It's called Bitcoin, but there's something different about this one.
Yeah.
Right. But you're trying to avoid that, right? You want to settle this on the infrastructure level.
Well, that and like from an indexer's perspective, if you're forking and you're not changing the envelope kind of like type.
Yeah.
You from an indexer's perspective, it's like the same stuff is happening, but like these inscriptions are following different rules.
Yeah.
And, presents a problem. It presents a problem for marketplaces and like it just, it needs to be a little bit more clear. And then on top of this, another reason why it's potentially hostile is they're incentivizing use of OPI with sats. So they're essentially kind of incentivizing the use of OPI with, when you use it, you get sats tokens.
From who?
From this group of people.
From the Unisat, basically.
Yeah. So let me pull up.
Because Unisat has already set the precedent of utilizing or leveraging the sats token for fees, right? Trading fees?
Correct.
So this must imply that Unisat has like a tremendous supply of sats tokens, or maybe they built like some sort of burn mechanism or like rerouting mechanism where they extract the sats from like the trading fees itself. Yeah. And they're rerouting them to the indexers that are supporting this whole thing.
Yeah,
which would make sense.
Yeah, so let me see.
These clever fuckers, dude.
Yeah.
These guys are clever for sure,
Yeah, and they're sort of like incentivizing the utilization of OPI with sats. And like you're right, they have like probably a lot of sats to do that with.
Well, they're building a whole ecosystem around sats. So like with that, I remember in the early days of Unisat, everyone, speculated at some point Unisat would drop its own fungible token, but I guess they've opted not to do such, just adopt one that has already, that's already very permeated, I guess, throughout the entire Ordinal space. So, and they're adding actually a lot of utility to it, and this is interesting, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this incentive mechanism is not, unknown to us, right? There's value in like incentivizing people to do stuff with a token.
So what do you think? Like, what's your prediction? Wouldn't you assume more indexers are going to come online to take part in that?
Well, yeah, that's the issue is like if you're going to come online as a result of this because of sats, then you're essentially indexing things that are old on the old standard,
Right.
on the old functionality.
Yeah.
And so that presents a problem if you are a developer who's building new stuff, like for example, we have Cyborg,
Yeah.
who's using the ORD 1.0 update,
Yeah.
and they're making fungible tokens in a much smaller envelope and a much smaller packet size.
Right.
Right.
Which has introduced like new efficiencies that I guess
Correct.
that were not possible before if you're clinging onto the 0.9. But I mean, potentially, I don't know, maybe like you're saying, a new module can be introduced
Yeah.
to this now forked ecosystem that Unisat and the indexer collab.
See, and that's
They can
the
kind
weird
of
thing.
like,
Let's
if they wanted to recreate the same thing.
Let's assume that they do create a module that kind of supports all this. Why not just use the ORD 1.0 update then?
I think it literally is like it's sounding like a control thing. It feels
Right.
like.
Right. That's what it seems like.
Yeah, as opposed to just, being at the whim of, I guess, the Inception Foundation is not the Layer 1 Foundation. Like the Inception Foundation is Casey Rodimer
Yeah.
and his small broom closet of developers,
Yeah.
his little crew,
Yeah.
or whoever else contributes, the maintainers of the base layer protocol, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's obviously not a collective
Yeah.
like force of megacorps or anything like that, at least not yet.
Right. Right.
But the point is, somebody else is kind of like dictating, with the input of the community and such. Like Benny's in there, like putting pull requests and such.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of evidence to suggest there's an ecosystem that is sharing its knowledge and experience and collaborating to push these updates.
Yes.
But instead of like being at the whim of that, it's like, let's just fork it and we created our own little nest.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we get to control more, like just a little added layer of control. To
Yeah,
this.
I can see that. So there's benefits to doing it both ways, right? If you got the control, then you're able to release updates quickly.
Yeah.
Right. But the value in like open source software is that there's so many eyeballs on it, especially when there's traction. Yeah. There's so many eyeballs on it. They can discover any vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm.
They can discover new functionalities that you didn't think about.
Yeah.
They can contribute code, things like that. And so there's benefits to doing both ways, but it's just the way that they're going about it doesn't seem very conducive to like a constructive. Make it easier for developers to kind of like pick, what indexer they're going to use.
Yeah. This is definitely interesting. This is a legitimate fork.
Yeah, this
like
is
a legitimate fork in the road because we're witnessing like two different ethos.
Yeah.
Right. One seems a little bit more like Web3 industry, like what we've seen in the past. Like these big players kind of come together,
right,
and they figure out a way how to like really navigate the space and like kind of control the market in a sense. They're gonna build these marketing narratives.
Yeah.
They're gonna attract the right developers. They're gonna build DeFi, and then they're gonna attract a lot of value as a result. And people are gonna like. The vast majority of people aren't like subscribing to an ethos. They're attracted to number go up.
Yeah, for sure.
Entertainment value go up.
Yeah.
Right. So if they could successfully achieve that through this like new collusion.
That's true. This
is the ultimate invisible hand experiment, right? Well, what does the hand actually want?
That's true. That's true. Is it the ethos or does his number go up?
Right. Yeah. So we're gonna see. But there's nothing that could really stop them from doing this, right?
No, there's nothing.
Nothing at all.
No.
So it's like, yeah.
But I mean, I don't know if they're being exactly clear as to what exactly they're doing, right? That's part of the confusion.
Well, they gotta make it not seem as potentially egregious, right?
Right.
Because we see this community, man. They could, they got claws.
Yeah, they do.
we got a couple of nicks ourselves.
We got some scars left
from you guys whenever we drop DMT. So there's some vitriol out there if you make a misstep.
Yeah.
In communications, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if people feel their bags being threatened, I don't know if there's another bigger threat than this, right?
Yeah. I don't know, dude. But this is fascinating. Man, the space is cooking.
Yeah, man.
It never gets dull. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And Benny we trust at the end of the day, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, Benny has shown he's obviously like as in tuned as any developer has been on this space, addressing some of the biggest concerns.
Yeah.
nobody else is even like noticing them.
Yeah.
Because he's the one actually trying to like make sense of everything with his indexing system, right? So, and he's very public and open about what it is he's finding, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
all right. Well, shout out to Benny for helping me kind of understand like what this really means and like the implications, because we've been chatting about this. I mean, obviously we were chatting about NATs and stuff, but like all this stuff, you know, it has an impact on how indexing occurs. And, you know, how developers like us who are just using existing protocols like our 1.0 update, child parent inscriptions, metadata, all that stuff, how it affects us when there's a fork out there being incentivized with SATS tokens.
Correct.
Right. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody here. And if you guys have any questions, let us know in the comment section below. All the links will be in the description. And most importantly, let us know what you think. Right. And we'll catch you in the next video.
Peace.